All right, you've heard me talk about snapshots before. Now I'm actually going to tell you what it is and how you can use it to make your life a little bit easier. So I'm in my example virtual machine here, Windows XP Professional that we've been using. And I'm going to go up to here. These three buttons here are the buttons I care about for a snapshot. Now before I start clicking on these, I'll just tell you basically what a snapshot is. It's a saved point in time that you can always get back to. And this is a real lifesaver for backups and just in case anything ever goes wrong during an upgrade of software or when you install something that all of a sudden doesn't play well with something else. But you can also use it for more than that, and I'm gonna go into that a little bit here. So these three buttons, this will create a new snapshot. This will go back to a snapshot that I've saved. And I think this button here, this is the Snapshot Manager. I'm going to click on that because it really illustrates the point here. On this virtual machine, I've only got 2 snapshots back in time. Now, if you've been following along, this is the point where normally I would say, okay, I've installed all my automation software, and so I'd take another snapshot and say, okay, my software is installed and configured. This is me setting up all my preferences for hotkeys and everything else, and keep any notes you need here for software version or whatever else. So I'll say take a snapshot. Okay, great. Notice I do have the virtual machine off. It gives me the option to power it on. I personally always do this when I take a snapshot of a virtual machine, and the reason why is because when you take a snapshot, all of this memory here, all of RAM, it stores that as well. That means if you have software running, things open, any kind of processes happening on the virtual machine, you can remember all of that. So if I have 10 Word documents and 6 PDFs and Rockwell is open and something else is open, I could have that all saved like that. And maybe you can find a reason to use that. Personally, I haven't found a reason that it's useful for me. So rather than taking all of that space on my hard drive when I make a snapshot, in this case 2 gigs, if you choose to make it more or less, it'll be more or less. I just choose to shut it down, and that way I always get a fresh reboot and I don't have to worry about that extra space on my hard drive. So without belaboring that point any longer, let's get back to the Snapshot Manager. So these 3 snapshots, I can click on any one of these and say go to, and it'll take me straight back to that snapshot. And something that I like to do, notice I have a snapshot here. I installed the operating system and I set it up for optimal performance. And it looks like I installed a serial USB driver as well. And I probably didn't need to have 2 separate snapshots here, but I took another snapshot after I set up my networking. And I've got everything set up in this operating system so that I think my industrial automation software will run well, so that I don't have to come back here and set the operating system up again. And the reason that's important is because, okay, say now I've installed some piece of software. Let's just say this is Rockwell because, well, why not keep using the Rockwell example? Now what if I want to install something from GE or something from Omron or something from whoever else? Maybe I come back to this same point here and I say go to that spot. It's going to warn me that everything in this current state that hasn't been saved in a snapshot will be lost. I say yes. If I come back to my Snapshot Manager, notice I have a branch here. And now I could boot this virtual machine and I could take another snapshot and say, this is Omron version whatever, version X. I'm going to take a snapshot. Okay, great. Now I can go back to Rockwell or Omron anytime I want, and I don't need to worry about them interfering with each other. And, I don't really know what software packages out there interfere with each other and which ones don't, but I know that some will. And as far as I can tell, Rockwell is probably the most sensitive because it's so deeply rooted in the operating system and everything. So what's the drawback here? Well, the more snapshots I have here, the more space it takes on my hard drive. And how do you know how much extra space it takes? Well, if I start here with just an operating system and I install all my Rockwell software, and then I come back to this point and I install it all again, the space difference between installing it here versus here, sort of in line versus branching out, isn't very big. But the more I start branching off of this and off of other things, it's going to add up in a hurry. And the reason that is because each time I take a snapshot, it remembers that point in time, and then it has a file. It's actually a virtual hard drive file. I'll show you that in a second, that stores everything that changes after that point. If I do an install and it changes a DLL that was already there, it's not just going to remember the bits that changed in that DLL. It's going to remember the whole new DLL file. So if I start branching off and branching off all over the place, every time a certain file is touched, and maybe that's a big file that only got a small entry put in it, that's going to get resaved as a completely new file. And so the more things branch here, the more we duplicate the files that we're storing. Okay, let's take a look at what these folders look like. Close this, and here I have, again, I like to store all my VMs inside of the C drive, and I have a VMs folder. And this is the sample VM that I've been using. Now, if I look at the description here, it's talking about virtual disk files. Notice that I've got several of them now. And the numbers here actually correspond with snapshot files. These snapshot files end up being very small, at 32K or so. Since I didn't do anything big with the last couple snapshots I took, I just took the snapshots and talked about it. Those are only 5 meg. But remember, we were actually installing software and making changes before, so this is where I start getting 400 meg, 100 meg. And if I installed Rockwell and then took another snapshot, I would start seeing things as large as the software that I installed. So in Rockwell's case, maybe it'd be 10 gigs worth of stuff. So just keep that in mind. These are going to grow as you use them. In total right now, this virtual machine is, let's see, still only 2 gigs. That's really small. That's very manageable. Typically something like my Windows XP machine, I've talked about this before, usually starts out at 10 to 15 gigs, and as I install more things on top of that, it gets bigger. Something like a Windows 7 machine, I usually see start at 20 to 25 gigs and expand from there. So again, more software installed, more snapshots, it gets bigger, but I personally think 40 gigs is very manageable. I'm tempted to load up one of these snapshots and then go in and just destroy the operating system and then go back to the snapshot and show you that everything's all fine and dandy. But just take my word for it. It does actually work, and it's a lifesaver. All right, that's all for now. Have fun snapshotting. Talk to you next time.